Okay, why don't I start us off, and everyone can hear the speakers then when they're coming in as we go. I hope you can all hear me fine. Thank you so much for joining us. The topic of the event today is going beyond the red line, making active travel work. We're delighted about the series of presentations that we're just about to hear. I'm Kat Griffith-Williams. I'm the CEO of Constructing Excellence in Wales. If for housekeeping purposes, if you can remain on mute but raise your hand, I can channel some questions between speakers, which might be helpful just to break up the presentations. So do feel free to raise your hand once.
You've gone on mute, Kat. Kat, you're still on mute. That's better.
That's weird. I wasn't on, it's not on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you now.
Okay, right. Are you seeing the screen now? Yes?
Yes, yeah.
And hear me. Sorry about that. Okay, I was welcoming everyone to the event, which is going beyond the red line, making active travel works. So many thanks for all joining us. We've got a packed lineup of presenters and some really good issues to discuss. I am Kat Griffith-Williams. I'm the CEO of Constructing Excellence in Wales. We're hosting this event today and delighted to do so. So just a couple of housekeeping points. We will channel some questions after each presenter, and we'll try and do that just to break up the session. But if you can remain on mute and raise your hand after a presenter and make use of the chat function, I can try and draw you in then to have an active engagement with Q&As following our presenters. So just to give you an overview quickly of what Constructing Excellence, who we are and what we do. We're the united voice of the construction sector, and we represent every part of the supply chain. We were set up in 2002 by Welsh Government in response to the Egan report, which is rethinking construction, and it's never been more pertinent even now with the construction playbook and many other innovations that are happening within the sector. But now we're an independent, self-funding body campaigning to highlight the industry's role in underpinning the Welsh Government's strategies and creating a built environment fit for the future. At our core is making the case for collaborative project delivery, promoting best practice and whole life value, and all of our key ambitions are aligned to the Future Generations Act. These are all our contact details, so for further events, do please link in to us. There's also support for the membership. But today, we're going to be hearing about making active travel work. There have been some couple of notable Welsh Government announcements and commitments to this, including within the Future Wales, the National Plan 2040, where the National Cycle Network and Active Travel are included as commitments. Welsh Government are committed to support the implementation of Active Travel Act to create comprehensive networks for local walking and cycling routes that connect places that people need to get to for everyday purposes. And yesterday, we've also seen the announcement in the budget for a 15.2 million placemaking fund, a part of the Transforming Town support. And included in this is the creation of the active travel routes for local authorities. So this is great news all round. But how do we make sure active travel is a part and accessible to our everyday lives? For example, getting our children to school safely by bike and enabling us to join a cycle network without using our cars to get there. We're going to hear from a range of speakers making active travel work from us. We've got Lee Waters, the MS Deputy Minister for Economy and Transport. We've got Chris Roberts, the Secretary for the Cross-Party Group on Active Travel Act. Gwen Thomas, a Network Development Partnership Manager for Sustrans. David Hughes, Principal Engineer from the City and County of Swansea. And Adrian Lord, Associate Director of Phil Jones Associates. So I'll pass it over to our Minister, Lee Waters, who's long been an advocate for active travel, even in his life before politics. So over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Kath, and afternoon, everybody, and thanks for taking the time to take part today. I think this is a really important event, and it's got an excellent lineup of speakers, and there's an excellent people on the call as well. So I'll speak quite briefly, I hope, and then happy to take any questions or points of challenge that you would like to raise. The first important thing I'd like to say is that the active travel agenda is here to stay. This is not just some fashionable fad. We have committed to achieving a net zero level of carbon emissions by 2050. Zero by 2050. That is going to be bloody difficult to do. Let us be under no illusions about that. This is a complete go against the grain of the way we've been going for the last 50 or so years for sure. And in transport, changing behaviours is going to be hard. We're about to publish our Wales transport strategy, and that will have in it a clear target for modal shift. So that is a target for getting people to make fewer car journeys and make more journeys by public transport and active travel by 2050, broken down. Now that is a hard stop, if you like, to the way that we have been treating transport for several generations, and that is going to require significant culture change, but it's also going to require a very different set of infrastructure. And I guess that's what today is about. So policies are now lining up behind this. We now have planning policy, thankfully reflecting this as well. Planning Policy Wales 11 has the sustainable transport hierarchy enshrined in it, so that new developments have walking and cycling networks planned in from the start. We're just about to publish our active travel design guidance, and I see Adrian Lord will be speaking to us shortly, who's been developing this along with Phil Jones. This is up there with the best set of guidance around, and this is what we're going to be expecting you to build to. And we're going to start getting a lot smarter and a lot stricter about the implementation of these design guidelines as well. Transport for Wales has now taken over a role in the scoring and the implementing of funding awards with a stage gate approach, and I'm encouraging them to start getting tough with authorities who are building things not to standard. They will not be getting funding. This is to achieve this behaviour change. We have to line up a number of different things. And let's just be clear who the target audience here is. The target audience is not middle-aged men in Lycra. Okay, this is not about people who like a jolly good tootle on the weekend on their bike. They are not the target market. Or for them, good luck to them, I say, but that's not what it's about. This is about climate change. This is about tackling health inequalities. This is about transforming communities so we start speaking to each other again and shopping in local shops. And all the evidence shows that if you travel by foot or by bike, you are likely to have better outcomes in all of these things. But we also know if we're going to get somebody who hasn't been on the bike since they were a kid to leave their car behind and cycle for a mile, because we know 10% of car journeys are under a mile, half are under 5 miles, or to walk down to the shops instead of jumping in a car automatically, we need to make the environment a lot friendlier, more comfortable and safer for them. So the consultation that local authorities are currently setting out using the Commonplace platform to inform the new set of maps, which are 3-year documents, the integrated network maps, which are required under the Active Travel Act, are about asking people who do not currently walk or cycle, or those who do as well, to get improvements that will encourage them to do it more, and to build routes that achieve that and routes to standard. Because we need to change the experience to make it a one you want to repeat, not one that if you do jump on a bike, you're scared out of your wits, or you have a bumpy, uncomfortable journey where you have to go around the dingle and are made to feel odd, frankly. Signs saying dismount. These subliminal signs we're sending are, you are not welcome, you're a bit strange, we'll put up with you if you have to. That kind of culture will not stand if we have to achieve net zero by 2050. Final thing I want to just say to the profession, there's a real exciting opportunity here, and there's money being spent. In 2018, we launched the Active Travel Fund, £10 million a year. The next financial year, it's going to be £75 million, just announced this week in the budget. Okay, we have secured a significant uplift in spending on this. There is serious money being spent on this, and this is not an agenda that's going to go away. Now, but also from a construction point of view, this is not about building mini roads. Okay, so this is not about taking the skill set you have and just doing smaller versions of it. This is about thinking and designing differently. And what I really want to see is the development of a specialist profession in Wales that shows that we can lead the way and do things differently. And that is about contractors who expect to get some of this money, being willing to put their teams through training based on the new design guidance. We'll help you with that. It is about getting the professions to mainstream the design guidance, so it's reflected in what you do. And I think there's a really exciting opportunity for the profession to create specialisms here, because as I say, there's a lot of money on the table and it's not going away. To make the most of this, both from a business development point of view, but also making your contribution to tackling climate change and making society better. And I think if we work together, there's a huge that we can achieve. Happy to take points or questions.
Many thanks, Minister. We've got the first hand up was from Ed Evans from Seeker. So if you can join in the discussion, Ed, I'll gladly bring you in.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And thanks, Leader. I think hopefully you realise that we're very supportive of this and have been for quite some time. It's a specific question, actually, about a very, well, you could say a bit of a niche thing in terms of active travel. But how do we deal with access for disabled people to get on to bikes and to behave a lot more actively? Presumably that would be part of the design guidance, but again, that's another step potentially culturally to get more people involved. Just wondered what your thoughts were.
I think it's a really good question. I think first of all, to say disability is a spectrum. So there are lots of disabilities, for example, that can benefit from existing routes and infrastructure. So if you were in a wheelchair, for example, having a paved surface that takes you on a pleasant journey is a massive advantage from what was there before. One of the things we've been doing out of the funding we've been putting in place is allowing local authorities to spend it on small things, what we call continuous improvement, and that includes barrier removals, because lots of routes, without thinking, kissing gates and all sorts of badly designed access barriers are put in place without any real thought about how people with disabilities are going to get through them, how families with cycle trailers are able to get through them. They're put there to deal with concerns about antisocial behaviour, about motorbikes and so on. They rarely do actually do the job that they're designed for, but they end up stopping lots of other people from even accessing it. So we're keen to tear those up, and where access barriers are justified, then they should be designed in a way that is inclusive, and certainly the design guidance that Adrian will be talking you through does address that. So for lots of disabilities, the existing infrastructure is disabled friendly. There is a particular concern amongst blind and partially sighted people about sharing surfaces and sharing paths, which isn't easy to solve. Some of that is about perception, some of it's genuine perception, some of it is false perception. So the research that's been done, certainly in Cardiff 10 years ago, and then Phil Jones has published an evidence review some years ago as well about the evidence on this. It's arguable the problem is greater than is claimed. However, if you are a blind or partially sighted person and have a bad experience, that's going to shake you up and make you stay indoors and have a deep effect on you. So even if it isn't as great a numerical issue as is sometimes claimed, it is nonetheless a real issue, and we have a commitment and a requirement and a duty and an obligation to be inclusive in our design and to bear in mind all users. So it's really important that this issue is addressed. One of the things we're going to be announcing as part of this new fund is money not just for new routes, but for upgrading existing routes. And I think this is something councils have been calling for a long time. They say you build these routes, there's no money for maintenance. Well, next year, some of the 75 million will be able to be used for maintaining and upgrading existing routes, resurfacing, widening, putting in lights, for example, to increase safety and perceptions of safety. And I would expect the design guidance will have to be followed as part of that, and addressing concerns and real obstacles to both pedestrians and cyclists, blind and partially sighted, and not need to address. So looking at street clutter and street furniture, I think it needs to be part of that. What we don't want, again, this is back to the bad implementation design, is too often some councils have done what is easiest to do, and they've just simply turned a pavement into a shared use path and ticked the box. That's no good. Now, segregated routes are the right approach in many occasions, but where volumes are lower, sharing is the right, but the sharing has to be designed sensitively, and we need to put other behavioural interventions in around that to address legitimate concerns many people who are disabled have.
Thanks, Lee. You've touched on perception, and that was in looking at that specific context that Ed had brought to us. But I want to bring Carrie Doyle in, and the question that we have from him. I agree that the policy is in place and welcome the additional funding for active travel, but how do we maximise the behavioural shift that the pandemic has brought on rebuilding the economic, social and cultural fabric of Wales? An extremely pertinent question, and again drawing on that perception being brought into behaviour change.
Well, all sorts of different behaviours we talk about. First of all, there's existing negative behaviours by motorists, and that that is not an easy one. But this culture where I'm in my big steel box, get out of my way, it's my right of way roads to hell with the rest of you, needs to be challenged and needs to change. Now, we are introducing from 2023 a 20-mile-an-hour default speed limit on residential roads, and we're currently piloting the approach for that. And I think part of that is about changing the culture of the road. We know that a pedestrian is 5 times more likely to be killed if they're hit by a car at 30 than they are at 20. And this measure, along with extra powers for local authorities to tackle pavement parking, has both a practical and a symbolic purpose to change the psychological balance and the culture around the road and the place of the person as opposed to the place of the car in that environment. So that's first of all, so I addressed just the negative issues of behaviour. Then how do we change people's behaviour? Now, one of the main drawbacks of our approach is that it is an almost exclusively infrastructure focused approach, and we know from the evidence that that is not adequate. We just have a very difficult problem within government of getting hold of revenue funding, and this has to be addressed in the medium to long term if we are going to get the climate change targets achieved. For now, it's primarily capital, but one of the things I'd encourage local authorities to do is be more imaginative in how they look at capital revenue splits, because it's entirely legitimate, according to the audit rules, to use capital for revenue purposes if you are promoting new infrastructure. So it needs to be thought of as part of the way routes are done. But there are other behavioural change interventions that we are already investing in, around cycle training in schools. I'd want that to be extended far more to adults. We're also working with employers and public service boards around the Healthy Travel Charter for things like car sharing and travel planning and so on. So it's a great question. We absolutely need to address the behavioural issue, the nudge, the carrot as well as the stick. And we are looking as part of the Wales Transport Strategy at disincentives as well as incentives. So road user charging, workplace car parking charging. That I don't think is at the front end of what we want to do. I think we need to put the infrastructure in place first that gives people alternatives before we start putting disincentives into place. The line, I think that is part of the armoury we'll draw on.
Thank you. I suppose it's not a question. We've got a couple of hands up and a couple more questions, but just to interject on that point, it's interesting that you kind of acknowledge a lack of resources, perhaps knowledge, and revenue within the sector and through the local councils, and perhaps the local kind of construction supply chain can help with that, and we can all work collaboratively together to achieve those aims, I suppose, is where I'm thinking would be a great shift as well. But if I can just bring another question in, we've got Barry Davis who's got their hand up. If I can draw you in, Barry.
Thank you, Kat. My question is, and perhaps maybe more of a statement, is I think we really need a change in mindset from highways authorities if this good work is going to be turned into reality. I'm not convinced that to date the really good work and good practice advocated in Manual for Streets has been fully embraced by highways authorities, particularly when they're dealing with planning applications and the development management system. my experience is amongst the vast majority of local authorities is that the car is still king. And in particular, the refuge lorry is still king. And we're still seeing that despite the best efforts of those of us in the design industry, residential developments are still dominated by the highway, and that residential housing layouts, etc., are dominated by designs which are there to facilitate car and the refuse lorry. We need to tear up that rule book and really make sure that the mindset of local authority development management officers is changed. Still too often we see new highway infrastructure, cycling and active travel infrastructure going in, but with priority still given across side roads for cars, and that really has to change if this is going to be acceptable.
Thank you. That might be a question because we've got a lineup of speakers, and Chris Roberts potentially is the best person to, if you can hold that question, and we'll draw Chris into that, I think, if that's all right, Minister, and we'll get Chris on with that. There is one other hand that I could probably bring to you, and then we'll go on to our other panelists. Is that okay, just to channel one last question? Super. We have Robert Thompson, who have got the hand up. I'll take some more of the questions as that we go on with our further speakers. But the last question for the Minister, if I can bring Rob Thompson in.
Yes, thanks very much. Thanks, Deputy Minister. Your A465 Active Travel Forum initiative, that's great news for us in Merthyr Tydfil. My question is, are you considering how to retrofit other trunk roads which at the moment have no provision at all alongside them for pedestrians, for cycling, and I mean alongside them, not on nothing on the route at all, and nothing to help people to get from the same points in any case. I think you did say you wanted to see active travel much more incorporated into new schemes, and as you know, we thoroughly welcome all you've done on that score.
Okay, I'll try and be brief because I'm hijacking the agenda here, so apologies for that. But I think there's a read across from what you just said there, Rob, with what was said just before, and this is about culture change amongst the professions. And I think we've got to take the professions with us, not beat them about the head by pointing out their inadequacies to date, because they've been working with an existing culture, but that culture needs to shift. There's a particular challenge around trunk roads. So the Active Travel Act requires new roads to consider the needs of active travel users. In practice, that's not happening. And we saw the first big road scheme developed under the Act, the Newtown Bypass. We'd had diddly squat for active travel in it, which was outrageous. So I commissioned a review into that, and from that review, we have now developed a PAD, I think it's called. I'm sure Chris will remind me what PAD stands for. But it's a set of, can you remember, Chris? It's a set of guidance. You need to unmute to remind us though.
Procedural advice guidance.
That's the fella. Which addresses this, and there is an event at the end of the month on both the PAD and the new set of Red Book rules on highway maintenance and when temporary works are put up, that Chris Roberts has been influencing. And so that's a lot of that is about, again, influencing the profession, putting new set of guidelines in. On the issue of trunk roads themselves, so we're hopefully going to bring some forwards from schemes next year, which can accelerate some particular cases. And I'm particularly keen that the A40 in Carmarthenshire, where we sadly saw a policewoman killed on a bike a couple of weekends ago, is part of that. But the issue here is, I think, and this is where is the best alignment for a route. If you are a new person to getting on a bike or walking, where are you going to feel most likely to be safe and welcomed to get on a bike? Is it on a narrow stretch next to a very fast and busy road, or is it off the alignment through an old railway line or through a field or whatever it is? Now, doing that is easier said than done, because obviously there are land issues. That is traditionally outside where the trunk road agencies would see their remit extending. So then it's into local authority ownership and leadership, which takes time. The funding cycles have traditionally been short term. So the whole system is mitigated against doing that well. And a part of what this process is about is re-engineering that system to put us on a different trajectory. So linking up little hamlets into the nearby towns, for example, is a key part of what we're doing. We're not going to do this in a year or 2 years. This is a 20-year, 30-year agenda, but setting out these integrated network maps based on consultation with non-traditional users will hopefully allow us, and some of the early results coming through the common space, common place maps. I'll put a link up in the chat in a second. For those authorities who have done that, I've noticed the Vale of Glamorgan have come back to people who've put comments in saying, this is what we've done with your feedback. Here are the routes we're proposing to put in. Excellent. And if every local authority does that, we'll have a set of future routes based on what people actually want to see, that then we can develop a pipeline of schemes that are shovel ready ahead of financial year, so we can start efficiently building and creating a chain that creates an environment that is far more likely to encourage people to change their behaviour. At that point, I'll shut up and come back.
No, that's great. Thank you, Deputy Minister. I think it's probably an ideal time, and very much appreciate the time you've taken to address some of the questions that we've got coming through. There's many more, but if we can move on to Chris Roberts, the Secretary of the Cross-Party Group on Active Travel, and hear from you, Chris, that would be great.
My name's Chris Roberts. I'm a former Special Advisor to Welsh Government working on transport and sustainability, and I worked on the Wellbeing Future Generations Act and the Active Travel Act. I'm Secretary of the Senedd Cross-Party Group on the Active Travel Act, but I must emphasise that I am today here as speaking as an individual. I'm not speaking on behalf of all four parties in the Senedd at this point, so close to an election. I'm hoping that you can now see a presentation in front of you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep, great, thank you. And I must say at the beginning, you know, it's great that the truth bears repeating, because the Deputy Minister has actually said a lot of what I was going to say, but I will say it slightly differently. So the Active Travel Wales Act came into pass in 2013 with a really strong ambition, which was to make walking and cycling the most natural and normal way of getting about. But fundamentally, it's not just about walking and cycling. It's not just about how they travel. What's really important is how they don't travel. It's about getting people out of cars. It's making walking and cycling the natural alternative to the car. And the reason we need to do that is the way we travel at the moment is a problem. I picked just three. The Deputy Minister spoke about some others, but you know, climate change, biggest crisis facing humanity. 16% of our emissions in Wales come from transport, and it's quite recalcitrant. They're not going down. In fact, in 2016, they went up, and over half of those emissions come from our love affair with the car. Air quality, a matter of life and death. There are people dying in Wales because we pollute the air with exhaust fumes. It's coming primarily from vehicles, and it's coming mainly from diesel vehicles. South Wales has the UK's second worst levels of air pollution. And we're in the interesting position of, in Caerphilly, we're knocking down a row of houses because they're not fit to live in, because they happen to be near a road. We desperately need to do something about the way we travel. It also has led to our sedentary lifestyle. Wales has the lowest physical activity levels in Britain, and that's true amongst our children as well, which is really worrying. This is making us ill. We have problems with obesity, which gives rise to a whole range of other illnesses, and it's costing Welsh NHS £35 million a year. Already in Wales, 50% of Welsh government, over 50% of Welsh government's budget goes on health, and actually 10% of the health budget goes on treating diabetes alone. So the Active Travel Act was all about changing everyday journeys. It's those habitual journeys. If we can get people into that, it's not about, as the Deputy Minister said, pootling around the park. It's about building it into your lifestyle so that you're getting the benefits of the active travel, but you're also removing the disbenefits of an over-reliance on the car. So active travel is travel to schools, workplaces, shops, interchange with public transport. Problem is, to get to all of those places, you end up going to places that people want to get to by car, so you end up in conflict with traffic. And fear of conflict with traffic is the biggest barrier to getting more people walking and cycling. That's why lots of people they do not want to share space with cars, particularly fast-moving cars. We always have to remember that most active travellers, and as Lee's just said, potential active travellers who are what it's all about, have a choice about how they travel. 83% of people who ride bikes, or 83% of adults who ride bikes, also drive. If their entire journey, and that's from door to door, isn't safe, convenient and direct, they'll drive. So putting on a 3-mile journey, putting 2.5 miles of segregated super cycle highway is not going to work if in order to get there, they can't get out of the junction, can't get past the junction at the end of their road. It has to be the whole journey. We've tended to think of active travel infrastructure as something that's added in bits, little by little, not thinking about, we're not going to be able to change people's minds about the safety of this until everything's finished. So it ruled out most everyday journeys in Wales. We simply do not have that type of infrastructure. And that's why we passed the law. There's basically 4 elements to the Active Travel Act. The basis of it is mapping and building routes. The idea is to get local authorities to think long term. Another provision of the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. We should be looking long term. And they are required to both map their existing routes and see whether those routes match the exacting design standards we now have in Wales, which Adrian will be talking about, and also their plans for the next 15 years, so that people have got a clear idea of where active travel journeys will be possible. The Act also requires Welsh Government and local authorities to promote active travel, but generally they don't. As the Deputy Minister has just been saying, there is a major problem in that almost all funding for active travel is capital. We need to have much more revenue to provide promotion. There is a saying, build it and they will come. Well, it's true to some extent, but if people don't know where the routes are, they don't know how to find out how to ride a bike, they don't know the details of what's available to them in terms of support, then they're much less likely to do it. Then there were 2 other elements that directly impact on highways. Deputy Minister's already mentioned it. It is so much cheaper and more efficient to provide active travel infrastructure when you're building or maintaining a road. You put it in from the beginning. It's much cheaper than retrofitting. So the Act put in place a legal duty, but unfortunately that legal duty wasn't observed, and there is a real problem that active travel has been seen as something solely for the active travel community. It only works if it's taken on board by the highways community. And then the final part was this issue of streetworks. We're telling young mothers with children that they should be cycling to school. If we provide them with a route, we need to know that route is going to be there and is going to be consistent. If they suddenly come riding along and find that road is now being dug up and they've got to leave the cycle path and go into busy traffic, they will stop and go back to their car. So to date, the Act has not been a great success. The first round of maps lacked ambition. Rather than providing comprehensive routes to everywhere people wanted to go, they basically extended the routes that local authorities had already got in place. So, for example, very few schools in Wales were mapped, and that's a principal part of our ambition, getting more children to walk and cycle to school. The funding then was paltry. It was around £7 per head. There was little support for promotion. As the Deputy Minister has said, and he should know, the Welsh Government ignored its own laws when it built the Carnarvon bypass. The Welsh Government is now retrofitting active travel provision on a bypass it only built a couple of years ago under the auspices of the Active Travel Act. And the guidance on streetworks ignored the Act. Wales continued with the Red Book, which is the UK guide on streetworks for the construction industry. And if you have a look at that book, it simply has a picture saying cyclists dismount. So in 2019, only 6% of people cycled at least once a week in Wales. However, that's all now changing. It's all good news, not unconnected with the previous speaker. In fact, very much connected with the previous speaker. We've now got new active travel guidance, which Adrian is going to speak about. But one of the things it does is require a minimum density of routes. So once the new plans are out, you shouldn't be able to go further than 250 meters without finding a new planned quality route. The funding now is over £23 per head, which is an amazing difference. There is now new guidance on trunk roads, which has been issued specifically to the trunk road community, to the people who actually build these, which makes it very clear about the need to adhere to the Act. And we have some very good new guidance on streetworks, which makes it clear that you must consider the safety of walkers and cyclists when you're putting in place any diversions or causing a problem on the road. It's really, really important. There is nothing more frustrating than trying to cycle somewhere to find there's a big sign up saying road closed, because the road needs to be closed to cars, and you're sent on a 3-mile detour only to find that there was no reason at all why bikes and pedestrians couldn't just continue through there. Promotion is still a problem, but that's acknowledged. It needs work. Final point I'd like to make is we have allies. The planning department in Wales has become huge advocates of active travel. It's part of the placemaking agenda, and some of the most radical statements we're getting about active travel are now coming from Planning Policy Wales. The new edition, Planning Policy Wales 11, was published last week. I put some highlights here. Planning authorities must ensure development proposals prioritise provision for access and movement by walking and cycling. That's a must. That's an absolute requirement. Planning authorities must ensure new housing, jobs, shopping, leisure and services are highly accessible by walking and cycling, and that planning for walking and cycling comes first before all other transport needs. And finally, my personal favourite, when it comes to building new houses, new housing estates, active travel infrastructure must be put in place early on in the development and before people living there move in. This is absolutely fundamental. There are really important points in people's lives when you've got a chance of changing their travel habits. For example, starting a new school, starting a new job. But a fundamental one is when people move home. If when somebody moves in, they can see at the very beginning that it's quite easy to travel by bike, to walk, or to use public transport, then there's a chance they at least won't buy the second car. This new planning policy, Wales 11, will be a real game changer. So thank you. Very happy to take any questions. I'm going to put the final slide up, which is the links to the new guidance, but we'll also circulate that to you in another way. Thanks.
Many thanks, Chris. That's a great presentation. We haven't got specific questions coming from the floor. Let me just check a show of hands. I will bring one hand in at this point, and then we'll quite quickly move on to Gwen Thomas to add to the debate and conversation. But if I can bring Stephen Daly in with if this is a hand for Chris, that would be great.
Hi, Chris. Yes, Stephen Daly here. I'm the chair of Welsh Hawk, and I was quite interested to see the bit on the guidance for streetworks. The biggest problem we have is the Red Book is statutory duty, so utilities will always fall back to statutory duty, and we have enough problem getting that enforced. The best way forward would be a permit scheme in Wales, and I'm baffled as to still why we haven't got one. And if we had a permit scheme in Wales, we could enforce that so much more strictly, and the utilities would be jumping through hoops to make sure it was done. So really, that's what we need to be pushing, is to join the rest of the UK, well, as I say, England, with a permit scheme, so we can actually monitor and regulate roadworks much more easily.
Hi, Stephen. That's a really good point, and it's something the cross-party group are pushing on. You know, we're really pleased with the new guidance, but it can't be just a supplement to the Red Book. It has to replace the Red Book in Wales, and we need it to be enforced. Local authorities have a major role to play here because they license most streetworks. So if local authorities can enforce the new streetworks guidance that Welsh Government put in, then we will be part of the way. But I agree with you. You know, the Red Book has been the go-to guidance for decades. It's going to be very difficult to wean people off that unless there is a clear legal basis for doing so.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Just one point before we go on to our next speaker, but there's been a bit of chat about training, and one question is agreeing that PPW is very supportive, but we think there must be more training for LPAs and highway authorities to ensure that policy requirement is being implemented and requires this to be done. There was a point in the chat showing that Constructing Excellence is offering orientated guidance for the construction organisations and clients to understand the importance of active travel to apply to their work. But I wonder if there's anything more being done, Chris, that you can add to that comment there.
I agree that training is essential. It's something we've tried to introduce into the guidance is a guarantee for more training. There is so much guidance and technical advice being issued all the time that it is difficult for people to maintain awareness of all of it. And I think it's incumbent on Welsh Government to be much more proactive in promoting these things. You know, there is an event taking place soon, which is very welcome, which will be looking at the new trunk road guidance and the new streetworks guidance. But that, you know, something that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act calls for is involvement of people who will be affected by decisions. So as well as notifying people, I think that the key to this is making sure that the industry and the people affected are involved in the drawing up of the regulations so that they have a stake in it and a much greater interest in following it.
Many thanks, Chris. I think we'll go over to Gwen Thomas now, who is the Network Development Partnership Manager for Sustrans. And let's hear from you, Gwen.
Good afternoon. Bear with as I slides. So following on quite nicely from Chris and Lee's presentations, I think what I'm going to talk about specifically is some work that Sustrans has been doing with Monmouthshire County Council, and specifically on schools, but obviously some of the process could easily be used for many other new build and retrofit projects. So in a previous role, I worked with for Sustrans for over 10 years as a schools officer. And unfortunately, I would quite often arrive on my first visit to a school to empty cycle racks if they were there at all. But considering the traffic outside the school, it wasn't really surprising that there was definitely room for growth in walking and cycling levels. So Wales-wide, only 44% of pupils travel actively to primary school and 34% to secondary. I will do a quick plug here for Sustrans' Welsh Government funded Active Journeys projects, which do increase walking, scooting and cycling to school by 17%, really emphasising that we do need to have those revenue projects as well, and there may well be opportunities to link this into projects where there are builds, and that will tie in further to my points about engagement as we go on. So the network of routes that local authorities should be planning now should be ambitious, and they should include, or they must include, all current and planned schools. I would definitely agree with Chris that we haven't had that ambition in the past, and we really must do better. Now, pupils can't drive until they're 17, so this is an amazing opportunity to be able to really increase active travel amongst those pupils who do not, or at least a high majority of them do not do enough physical activity. And obviously that has an effect on those levels of obesity and overweight children that we have in Wales. The work that we did with Monmouthshire County Council, we looked at network development using a 3-arm approach, so engagement, modelling and site visits. And as I'll detail as I go on, all 3 of those elements are important and they sort of calibrate each other. So an initial engagement phase that Monmouthshire County Council went through with Sustrans and internal and external stakeholders was to work out what the focus of the network that they were planning to put in place should be. And it was decided that schools, key employment sites, including town centres and bus and train stations should be the key focus for the network for active travel that they were going to plan. So in Monmouthshire, 50% of children currently walk to schools, that's primary and secondary, less than 1% are cycling and 22% travelling by car, with 28% on the bus. We also typically ask in schools, how would children like to travel to school? And as is nearly always the case, more of them ask that they would be able to walk, scoot and cycle more often. But of course, it's often the infrastructure that's in place that is stopping that from happening. So currently in Monmouthshire, 48% of secondary pupils cite that they felt very safe whilst walking, whereas only 13% felt safe while cycling. And this is obviously quite often to do with traffic danger or perceived traffic dangers due to speeds and volumes, but also that lack of cycling and walking infrastructure, lack of crossing points, infrastructure for cycling that stops and spits you out onto the road. So we're going to concentrate specifically on Chepstow School, which is the secondary in the town, where 77% of pupils live within 3 miles. Now, Wales's learner travel measure means that only pupils who live over 3 miles from the school will receive free transportation. And that is an opportunity in terms of knowing that within that 3 miles, we could be creating brilliant walking and cycling infrastructure, and that would automatically, if you like, mean that they could be used by high levels. Sustrans used Cardiff University Spatial Design Network Analysis to do some modelling work on active travel potential, given the current levels of motorised traffic in Chepstow. We then inputted the postcode data of the pupils to show us the flows of walking and cycling that we could see if good provision was made. As you can see here, the star denotes the location of the secondary school, and as would be expected, the highest flows are those very close by to the school, as of course nearer the school you get, fewer are the options of routes. Here you can see the cycling routes or potential cycling flows, and they very much align with some of the key pedestrian flows. And just to note here that on the western side of Chepstow, just off the A466, you can see where the importance of engagement and site visits comes in, as the model would imply that anyone travelling from the north to the south would take a detour to the west. But anybody who does cycle on a regular basis would know that that would probably impinge on your travel time rather than help it. Here we've overlaid the engagement feedback onto the cycling flows, just to show really that the importance of that engagement, and obviously to start helping us understand what could be improved along those alignments to make walking and cycling safer, more convenient and more pleasant. So we end up with 5 main routes, broken down into 3 main cycling routes, which are, or cycling and walking routes, 1A, 1B and 2A, and with the green and blue being pedestrian alignments. And this is where we would then encourage local authority to concentrate efforts on improving walking and cycling. Again, we went back to the engagement work and used that to help come up with suggestions for what should be improved. So along St Lawrence Road or the A466, the red route, as you can see it here, where we had high levels of engagement feedback, we've suggested improvement of crossings and improved infrastructure heading north-south and onward towards the school. Also, the section that you can see on the sort of furthest north on the red, which is where we would see the highest levels of walking and cycling, we suggest that there would be a need to reduce the flow of vehicular traffic, either through filtered permeability and or a one-way system for motor vehicles, allowing more space to be given to walking and cycling. So if you were building a green school, definitely focus nearest the school to start off with, where you were going to see the highest numbers of walkers and cyclists, and work backwards from there. Although obviously, as Chris was mentioning, we would definitely suggest that a route focus is given so that more and more people can walk and cycle for their entire journey. So to summarise, yes, do use models to create a network based on evidence, but also engagement feedback and site visits are important as a reality check. And if funding, although it doesn't sound like funding is going to be an issue in the future, initial improvements should be nearest the school or destination that you're focusing on, where they benefit most users. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gwen. You know, it's great to hear how practically these things can be implemented, and all the work that you've done along with that as well. I know time is ticking on, so I'm going to go right over to David Hughes, Principal Engineer from City and County of Swansea, to talk us through the next part in our presentations.
Everyone, hope you can see that image. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to give an update of where we are with active travel in Swansea. Just like to set the tone really as to the definition of the question, what is the red line? I think a lot of us who deliver infrastructure perceive it as a construction extent, and it's clearly not that. The red line is the parameters around the active travel programme, which fundamentally is within the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. So for us, and the rest of this presentation is looking to see what we can do under the premise of well-being future generations, whilst delivering active travel, and obviously a local authority has got a key part to play in that. This image was taken what feels like 100 years ago, but actually it was about 12 months ago, pre-lockdown, and illustrates typical city centre environment. Huge congestion, morning peak. For those familiar with it, it's Swansea University on Mumbles Road, and it shows large number of commuters heading into the city. A lot of us travelling from the sort of Mumbles area within that sort of 4 or 5 mile parameter. And the reason I like to show it is because it shows some of the best active travel infrastructure in Wales, both on the left and right hand side of that image. You've got 6 metre wide active travel routes that are flat on a sunny day, and people are still prepared to sit in their cars. So I think in the context of what we're talking about today, you know, it is about infrastructure, but it's also about maximising what we've got and making sure we learn from why people aren't using them or aren't adapting. So our work to date is very much sort of socially and economically driven. We target key areas. We see here we've got nearly 30% of households that don't have access to a car, and when you break that down into their age groups and look at the sort of increased patronage to vehicles, clearly there's an opportunity here that we can maximise through active travel. When you overlay that then on the heat map, then showing where those zones are, it's no surprise to show that they're actually the areas that suffer from health challenges as well. So there's obvious need for change. Not going to go back into the rationale and the obvious benefits for active travel. But what I'm trying to reference today is that this isn't simply about infrastructure. It's about getting people to engage, be part of that development so that they use it in the long term. So in terms of ambition, Swansea's looking to more than double its infrastructure within the next 5 years, and we're on track to do so. So everything in red is proposed, blue is existing. Like I say, we're on track to do that. But the key is to do that in a community-driven way and not really measure it in terms of physical infrastructures and output. It's how many people use these routes, not just how many we build. It's really positive to hear that there's additional planning context to support that. Swansea does have a local development plan that has active travel fully embedded. Consistently, though, we will have challenges from developers who will reference project viability and timescale as constraints to introducing that, which I would challenge on both accounts. The fact is, you know, you've got Welsh Government introducing significant strategic infrastructure that we're looking for them to tap into. It's still not acceptable, but you'd be amazed how often it happens that small developers think it's appropriate just to provide a cycle rack out the front of their office block. That's not going to create the fundamental step change we require. In terms of expanding and keeping within the red line parameter, obviously active travel is part of a broader network of sustainable transport. You know, we live in a hilly and wet environment, and obviously we need to encourage and ensure that these provisions align with schools, but they also align with the rail and the bus networks. There's obvious constraints and barriers to active travel, and I think we've touched on many of them today. But the reality is that there is a long-term ambition to decarbonise, and maybe historic sort of references back to sort of ward members who have been challenged by residents to say, yeah, that's your long-term ambition. We have to apply that. I think there's an action on us as officers in terms of delivering these projects to say, well, yes, that is your ultimate goal, but maybe we can help you in promoting that initiative. So yeah, it might come down to one individual is losing a car parking space. It's not simply acceptable to say decarbonisation, therefore it has to happen. I think it's incumbent on us as officers delivering these schemes to actually give them the broader picture to show that this route is part of a strategic network. And by the way, that route offers you X, Y, and Z. So these images reference promotional material we set up as part of our active travel program. So the image on the left is a wheel from a bike that shows the different colours of the key networks to introduce, and each of those references then the colours of promotional material that include stuff such as community benefits, key skills development, green infrastructure. So it's giving both the community and those ward members the ammunition to sort of substantiate what we're trying to do, rather than just discounting their comments saying, well, yeah, you're losing one car parking place, it's not unacceptable. if I reference one sort of case study, this is a number of schemes that are packaged under the Northern Strategic Route. And for those familiar with Swansea, effectively follows the northern boundary of the city, primarily along sort of M4, A48 type corridor. And historically, the principal infrastructure we've got is on a north-south parameter linking from, I guess, the coalfields along the old railway lines towards the Docklands. So it's been, I guess, ignored, and possibly because of the topography, but also because it's seeking to link between adjacent authorities, which hasn't always been a prerequisite for Swansea to do. It's perhaps focused on getting people to the city centre, and maybe that needs to be a step change. And when you overlay on this image the fact that they're key employment hubs, you can see that not only providing a route along that green swathe would link those employment hubs, but actually would link our key networks as well. So these are images taken when I was allowed to, and the weather was nice, and shows that they're not just standard routes. We've got great guidance showing what we can implement, but each route needs to be bespoke to its environment. This is these images taken from a scheme we did up in Trallwyn, so northeast of Swansea, and it shows that they're sympathetic of the environment. And the rationale put in the image on the top left, we happen to have a contractor who on weekends did wood carving, and asked if one of the trees that had to be felled as part of the project, he could practice his art on the project, which we're obviously happy to do. But it resulted in a totally different engagement with the community. It fully brought them into the project, and it made us challenge as officers. Why are we stumbling on that as an opportunity? Maybe we should consider that. We are creating places after all, and if nothing else, COVID has shown us that these routes are real community outlets. The other thing in Swansea, and I'm sure other authorities are similar, we've got a green infrastructure policy. These are green arterial routes across our city that, as a matter of course, wherever possible, we should be looking to introduce new greenery, new planting, and that also aligns with our SUDS ambitions. Swansea, for the end of the M4, we do have a skills challenge, resource challenge, and as a programme, rarely have had an opportunity to invest within our local skills. So we've got a bricks and mortar initiative which looks to develop apprentices through our contractor base, and using our regional construction framework, we've sought to target the smaller to medium enterprise contractors, because not only does that support our local economy, but actually it develops a skill set that we're sadly lacking and will deliver in the future. That goes beyond just the construction workforce. As a design office, we've taken on a number of apprentices, and I'm not going to sit here and promote the benefits of apprentices. I'm sure we're all aware of that, but ultimately that challenges the way we work. It challenges the way we consult and promote our projects. And the individual on the bottom left, someone that's gone through that program's come out as now an engineer with the team, and it's really positive to see that individual and others not only complete that program, but then go and design a scheme next to their own school and become a STEM ambassador. I think that's an add-on to what Active Travel is trying to achieve, but why shouldn't it form part of the program? Each of the contractors I referenced above committed when delivering Active Travel to doing a number of community benefit initiatives, primarily based around local schools, because a lot of our schemes did pass directly adjacent to those schools. And that involved a number of charitable donations based around competitions within schools that ended up with bikes being handed out, scooters, high-vis vests, and actual physical infrastructure. So we actually had free donation of shelters and scooter pods. I know historically there's been a question, is Active Travel primarily about commuter modes? Clearly it's not, from the discussions we've targeted earlier. And this initiative, which was having people come in, again, as a charitable donation funded by our contractors to do free bike maintenance for the children, has ended up as a successful project where actually parents are now sort of leading, and it's a totally community-based initiative, and shows that we can provide it, but we need them to engage. There's no point just building infrastructure. And there's nothing more positive than seeing those parents drop their children off to school and then they cycle off to go to work themselves, which perhaps they wouldn't have done unless we provide that infrastructure. Very little of what we're talking about today is new. It's just aligning initiatives and programs that the authority already delivers. So we've got a road safety team. So why not use that road safety team when they're doing their educational programs in the school to highlight the health and safety benefits of Active Travel? It's already there. So it's aligning what we do. The net result of that is, instead of having those initial challenges and those barriers from the community that are concerned that it doesn't provide that long-term benefit, you actually engage them using multi-generational approach, and it totally changes the approach to Active Travel. We've talked a lot today, a number of speakers have talked today about the benefits of communicating what we're doing. I think over the last 18 months, we've spent a lot of time, albeit in difficult circumstances over the COVID period, developing new material, new websites to promote what we're doing. And again, going back to the sort of the COVID scenario, it's all about data driven. It's all about showing how the figures and the change of modes are changing over a period of time to show the ultimate benefit. So a lot of counters, and then referencing that, and then challenging communities, say why are certain communities not engaging in this? Where we are in Swansea at the moment, yeah, the opportunities we do get to travel and see what's going on. There's a lot of new infrastructure landing on site. Unfortunately, these are catalogue images because some of these haven't quite landed yet. But the principle here is that we're going to introduce cycle hubs primarily at our park and ride sites. And that's on the basis that we do have instances where people have said they love to cycle to work, but they live in locations that, it challenges them. So this initiative is basically, yeah, you drive to a park and ride, your bike is stored in a secure, high quality facility, and then you can cycle that last couple of miles into the city centre for the obvious benefits that offers. It's about enhancing that user experience. We're providing the infrastructure, but it has to be followed by communication and enhancement of what's there, so it's not just empty infrastructure. So these are bike maintenance and repair stands, cycle lockers in the city centre environment where we're told employers haven't got the opportunity to retrofit their building, and eco shelters, which again, is cycle storage, but align with our green policy. So in broad summary, the schemes that work best are those that are community driven. And basically, we need to change the mindset of certainly the smaller developers to accept that active travel has to be embedded into the project. I think it's worth reference as well that the SAB challenge is one that can be really embedded into the project to make significant benefit, but it is difficult, it is challenging the timescales. And the last one really in terms of what's really been a success for us, I think, is that regional skills and developing both engineers and contractors within our forum. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That's a fantastic presentation to hear practically how you implement the Active Travel Act and the actual real-time challenges about that you experience. I really hope everyone that's joined us can still stick around for our final speaker of the session, which is Adrian Lord, the Associate Director of Phil Jones Associates. David, I'll just point you to some of the comments in the chat box, and perhaps you can draw and look upon them, and we can tackle those after we've heard from Adrian. So over to you, Adrian.
Okay, can you see this screen?
Yeah, we can. If you put it into presentation mode, that would be great.
There we go. So I'm just going to try and wrap up what everyone else has been saying, really. And the fortunate thing about being last is that I can say lots of the bright ideas that other people have already said. I'm going to start by thinking about what we mean by active travel. And then picking up on what Gwen was presenting about this idea of networks and how we prioritise routes within those networks. Thinking about the context of whether it's urban, rural, what sort of place it's in, and then how do we embed that knowledge within the supply chain? So really, how do we get people to understand what is required? So what Chris said is quite important. The Active Travel Act applies to utility trips. So the everyday sort of journeys that we try to make, because they're the ones that will have the biggest impact on carbon reduction and on the physical activity of people. But of course, people do walk and cycle for lots of other reasons, and we've seen during lockdown, one of the most effective measures we ever did for getting people out walking and cycling was to tell them to stay at home. So everybody suddenly took to the streets last March and April. And just in terms of terms, we've had a few things coming up in the chat about access for all and ensuring that the guidance covers disability. We did have on the initial steering group and also on the revision last year representatives from Disability Wales and guide dogs, as well as user groups from the sort of walking and cycling sphere, to try to ensure that the guidance does reflect the genuine needs of everybody, and to ensure that the infrastructure that we design then also reflects their needs. So, picking up on this point about the network, although we within the guidance define some active travel routes, generally what we mean by that is it's just about everywhere. Because if you think about how we design traditionally our towns and cities, they're usually a block width of about 100 meters. So a typical urban block is 100 meters square. And around that, you're able to walk. Sometimes you're able to drive. Most of the time, you're able to cycle. So, traditionally, when we were designing towns and cities in the past, that was the kind of natural spacing. And for the purposes of active travel, we're saying, well, the aspiration within the guidance is now to at least offer something that is acceptable for walking and cycling as a basic network at a 250 meter grid. And that need not necessarily be a dedicated cycle route. It may be just alterations to the traffic conditions such that it is safe enough for walking and cycling. So thinking about what enables walking and cycling and what encourages it. So we're quite good, and what we've tended to do is things that enable walking and cycling within new development and within the highways, traditional highway design. We've tried to sort of keep routes available for walking and cycling by fitting infrastructure that keeps you safe enough, but might not necessarily be pleasant. But the things that encourage walking and cycling are these kind of more urban design-led features, such as active frontage, such as a sense of place that, we have very standard highways designs. But if we want more people to walk and cycle and more people to visit our towns and cities as land use evolves, then that sense of place and the landmarks and the urban design becomes much more important. One thing that we've found as well is that if you are habitually driving everywhere, you might know your own route and you might rely on sat-nav if you go somewhere else. But once you're out of the car, there is a whole much finer, denser network of routes available to you. And so having available mapping and interpretation to explain what the area is and some of the history of it and to engage people in their local environment becomes more important for active travel modes. As said before, the quality of the materials is important. And also the way in which people use the street is quite different. So driving is all about movement and getting from A to B. When you're walking and cycling, it's much more about the experience as well. Even on everyday utility journeys, you might need somewhere to stop, particularly if you've got disabilities, and also a chance to meet and catch up with other people. So it's thinking about all of the other things that happen between buildings that that people might be doing while they're on foot and cycling, but are not necessarily just the business of getting from A to B. Just picking up on some of the comments about different contexts. So within the guidance, there is sort of tables and advice on when it's safe for people to cycle within the traffic, when it's safe for people to cross without signal control, and when they need signal control and things. But in general, these are the sort of general environments to think about. So if it's a place where there are lots and lots of people and the primary function is to be there because it's where you live or it's where you're going to go shopping, then in general, it's beneficial to be able to mix with other traffic, and that people should be the dominant design criteria for that area, and vehicles should be a secondary consideration. As you get into the places with more of a link type function, so the ones that are yellow in the list there, then that is when you start to need the more separate infrastructures to enable the sort of larger volumes of motor traffic to proceed unimpeded, and to keep you safe and completely separate from other users. And that, in terms of new development, may be formalized in design codes, and for local authorities it might form part of their supplementary planning guidance to ensure that there is some sort of hierarchy of routes within their locality. And it isn't really rocket science. So although within the guidance there are cycle audit and pedestrian audit tools which kind of explain some of the key design concepts in more detail, really you should just be asking yourself some fundamental questions. You know, if you're building new housing, where are people going to be putting their bikes? If you're building new retail, can people actually get here from the surrounding area? You know, would I let my child use this area? And you know, it doesn't have to be very complicated. It is about linking all of those things that we just saw examples of in Swansea. So what other services will support walking and cycling? So that's me done. I thought I'd rattle through it quite quickly because you know, I'm just repeating what others have said. And in terms of training, there is the Constructing Excellence Wales programme, and we are sort of offering active travel training through Constructing Excellence Wales, which reflects the content of the guidance and the spirit and ambition of the Future Generations Act. And then there's a link there at the bottom as well to the active travel guidance from Welsh Government. So that's me done. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. You know, that's great. I think it's a testament to see how important this issue is to a lot of people that we've retained. Still a lot of people on this meeting and call right the way through to the very end. So it just shows and demonstrates the importance of active travel really to all those. I have got a hand up, and I wonder if I can bring some of the presenters in for some of the comments that have been raised in the chat box before we do close the meeting. But if I can bring Liam Ryan in to ask a question.
Thanks very much. So I guess my question is, could we do more with residential streets where we have capacity for two-way vehicles, cars and so on? Could we make a lot of that space one way and use that the spare space created for more safer routes for bicycles?
Yeah, I mean, I think through the sort of Manual for Streets approach and through retrofitting, as has been done in Grangetown in Cardiff, you know, it is quite possible to design cycle-friendly streets, and it doesn't necessarily need specific infrastructure. It's more about creating low-speed designs where people feel that it's safe to mix. You know, and that might include organising the car parking slightly differently to how we do it now. We've kind of got used to being able to park directly outside our homes, and that our front garden, you know, is maybe used as a car park, but maybe, you know, that doesn't have to be the case. And certainly in Dutch developments, sometimes the cycle route is the main route that the houses front onto, and the car parking goes around the back. So, you know, it may be that in future with new developments we design it slightly differently.
Could I just add to that? Because, you know, obviously there's a design engineering element to that question, but the real issue is political, isn't it? It's about bringing people and local authorities along with us with the whole range of reactions you'd get to a proposal like that. The example Adrian cited there of Grangetown was done off the back of the SUDS legislation, and I think there's a huge amount that can be done with SUDS because you are giving some people something better than it's replacing. But on just the hard politics of it, we are very clear in our Wales transport strategy about achieving the carbon reduction targets, that road space reallocation has got to be part of the mix of what we do. Now, easier said than done, for sure. We've seen during the pandemic some bold local authorities taking the opportunity of the quiet streets to put in temporary pop-up lanes, which are then being converted into permanent lanes. We've seen that in Cardiff, and that is excellent. We're looking at now how we use the funding and whether or not we have a fund which is available to top up the funding of authorities who are prepared to be bold. Because ultimately, this is the thing I get a lot of on Twitter, particularly. It's, why are you letting this local authority do that? Well, the highways belong to the local authority. They are highway authorities. It's not, the Welsh Government do not own local streets. So we have to work with local authorities to be able to, through funding incentives and guidance and all the rest of it, to try and get them to do the right thing. But there's often local resistance and local politics, and we live in a democratic society, and that is a real issue. But I think, as I say, the SUDS offer a way, the 20-mile-an-hour work we're doing now, and the comms and hearts and minds work that will go around that, and then incentivizing through funding those local authorities who are prepared to make the hard choices, can all start to change the culture. And then just finally, I would say, 20 years ago, when I first started working in Cardiff, and I had a bike, I was pretty odd and pretty unusual. And now you walk around pre-pandemic, central Cardiff, at 8:30 in the morning, it is full of bikes. I would say Llanelli is where Cardiff was 20 years ago. So you still have bikes on the leisure routes, but through the main streets, people who cycle are very eccentric and very few and far between. But I think Cardiff shows that you can, over time, create a critical mass and bring about change. So it is a normal thing to do. And that really is what the active travel agenda is about. How do we make this normal, commonplace, not eccentric, not weird, something a mother or a young dad would think of doing without being scared witless? And that really is what all this technical stuff is about. So we're making society a better place to live.
Thanks for those answers. Yeah, I think being bold was a key phrase there. I think it's not tinkering, is it? We've got to be bold with these things. Thanks very much for your answers.
We have got to be bold, but I'm up for election in 2 months' time, and that, it concentrates the mind.
I just wonder, I did see Jack Thurston on this meeting, and I just wondered, Jack, are you there? I know that you've got that journalistic perspective on cycling, and just wondered what some of your thoughts might be. Are you still with us, Jack?
I'm here.
Hello there.
Hi. Yeah, I'm chiefly worried about when Lee gets promoted to some other role that isn't leading on active transport, because he's got that approach as well. I mean, as an ex-journalist and an ex-NGO guy, couldn't be a better choice. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting how this agenda has been. It seems to be leapfrogging going on across the UK, with different places that suddenly race forward with doing something and getting a lot of attention about it, and then other places then say, well, we need to beat them, and there's a sort of competitive element to it. But I guess my question is, the low traffic neighbourhoods, which seem to become a real touchstone across the border in England, with people in favour and people very much against. To what extent is that traffic reduction placemaking approach dovetailing with the active travel integrated network approach, which seems to be much more of a routes-based approach, kind of say, you need to get from here to there, here's your route, rather than thinking, okay, how can we just reduce the overall level of traffic and create, the mesh that Adrian talked about, rather than specific routes? Because I definitely get the feeling from my local authority that they do talk much more in terms of routes from A to B rather than overall traffic reduction.
Yeah, I've sort of coming on what the theory says within the guidance. What you end up with the active travel route network is the more the more strategic links through a settlement. But then if you think of it like a patchwork, then in between those strategic links where you might be addressing certain barriers like getting across main roads and getting along main roads with dedicated infrastructure, there is kind of the grid of residential streets, which are essentially your sort of low traffic neighborhoods. So they form a part of the network, and entry treatment and whether or not you need to maintain access to some of those streets is something that you do as part of the active travel route network.
I think Chris touched on the answer to this in his presentation as well, so I suggest he might want to answer. But I would say, there's definitely an overlap with the transforming towns work and the placemaking agenda within planning more broadly. But Chris might be better placed to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, there is some, Cardiff have ambitions to create low traffic neighbourhoods. I mean, perhaps under different names. And if you go around the area of Grangetown, where the SUD scheme, the Green Grangetown scheme, you'll now find that over the last year or so, Cardiff has been turning roads into cul-de-sacs, which make it very difficult for traffic to get around, but the end of the cul-de-sac has a cycle route through, and it's very simple, basic things like that. In the new guidance, the term that's used a lot is the basic network. It's never going to be possible to provide dedicated, segregated routes to people's homes, but we know that unless people can travel safely from their homes, they're not going to walk and cycle. So the idea is to pacify areas around people's homes under a variety of ways. I mean, again, thanks to Lee, we're making huge step forwards in having a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, because speed is critical in this agenda. So I think it's the idea of low traffic neighbourhood is gaining ground with the more progressive authorities, and long may be the case.
Can I just come in on that as well? I think in some places there is no other option. We're going to have to create these low traffic neighbourhoods, because we can't literally to build a route along some alignments where it's been identified they're needed, such as that Kingsmark Lane in Chepstow. You'd be talking about taking lots of people's gardens, or things that are beyond the big money that Lee is now putting towards active travel, and actually it's reducing motorized vehicle speeds and volumes is absolutely key to getting some of those routes in. It's the only way realistically to make it happen. So I think low traffic neighbourhoods is definitely aligned with some of those routes that we're talking about, as Lee and Chris have both said, really.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Chris. Time is ticking on. Is there any final points anyone would like to raise or mention? David, is there anything that you have got to contribute there?
No, just going back to some of the queries, really. I think Sab is repeating comment. I think we're slightly fortunate the way we work as an authority, that we do have that ability to align, but I think that's an evolving programme, so I'm sure that'll resolve itself, but it is a challenge. And going back to the Section 106 contributions, there's quite a lot of discussion here about not necessarily the last mile, but the last quarter mile, getting to the front door, and that a lot of that comes within certainly new developments, how we instill that from day one. If I can go back to that Section 106 element and the fact that I was referencing in my presentation that we've got responsibility as officers to give our ward members the ability to promote a programme that fundamentally they are supportive of, but that competing pressure with new developments is sometimes split between Section 106 towards a new school or affordable house or housing or active travel, it's for us to reference the fact that active travel has just as viable an importance, that maybe not as visible and politically supportive, but in the longevity, it does offer a broader benefit. Sometimes it's very difficult for a ward member to say, yeah, I'll have a reduction in contribution for schools towards active travel, and we need to emphasise what that offers them.
Could I just say something, just to pick up on a couple of things? I know David's presentation was excellent, and a couple of things in there that really need to be teased out for others. I think this idea of placemaking, I think, is really important. So including things like public art, benches, biodiversity, local growing schemes, finding ways to bring this not just a transport corridor, but a community corridor. And I think, I say what was really struck me of seeing David is this is exactly this of the principles that John Grimshaw adopted in setting up the first national cycle network, Bristol to Bath Path, all those years ago. And so, those principles are the fact that David has almost independently come to the same conclusions, just reinforces how right they were, really. And I think the funding allows flexibility to do things like that, which takes me on to my sort of last point, really, is its capacity is the challenge. We're asking a lot of a few here. And there are very few local authorities who have got properly resourced and skilled teams to do this work, and now we're chucking money at them, and they are struggling, A, to spend it, and B, to spend it well. And so this, I think, is the big agenda, and I was talking to Transport for Wales about this yesterday. We need, and this is back to my pitch at the beginning to the profession, really, we need to build up a cadre of active travel professionals, both at the regional and national level, through the new corporate joint committees, so Transport for Wales as a Wales-wide expert, and then in the firms themselves. You think nothing of having specialist highway professionals. Well, I would suggest you need to start thinking of active travel in a similar vein. It'll, in your interests, in creating this specialism and in training and cultivating that skill set, because this is, as I said, as I started and I'll finish, this is an agenda that's not going anywhere.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect opportunity really to close the meeting. Leave it on your comments, Lee. Thank you, Deputy Minister. I just want to thank everybody that was involved in today's event. What it demonstrates to me is that there's a great appetite and interest on the subject, and we've got a breadth of knowledge to learn from each other. A lot of best practice out there as well that other local authorities can share that best practice with. There's quite a lot of comment on the side as well about further training, further events. So please watch out from us in Construction Excellence Wales. We'll certainly try to coordinate and collaborate on taking this forward. And I think, again, it just shows really the appetite really for discussing this, that we've been over our time limit as well on this meeting. So, I thank you all very much for your time. We will follow up from everybody that's attended with all the links that have been provided. There's been a huge resource of material and collateral that's been shared on the side, and we'll also send the recording of the event for anybody that couldn't watch it, or if you want to distribute that following this event. So many thanks all, and have a great afternoon. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.